Marcus Chan sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at the eviction notice taped to his door. 3 months behind on rent, his graphic design freelance work had dried up completely. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from creditors, but today it remained silent from the people who mattered most, his so-called friends. Just 18 months earlier, Marcus had been the golden boy of his social circle. Fresh out of college with a computer science degree, he had landed a senior developer position at TechFlow Industries, one of the city's most prestigious startups. His starting salary of $120,000 felt like winning the lottery for someone who had grown up in a single-parent household where his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. The transformation had been swift and intoxicating. Marcus moved from a shared apartment with 3 roommates into a sleek downtown loft. He bought his first car, a gleaming BMW that turned heads in his old neighborhood. More importantly, he became the center of his friend group's universe. Every Friday night, Marcus would get texts from college buddies who had barely spoken to him during their senior year. "Hey man, want to grab drinks?" they would ask, and Marcus, flush with newfound wealth and eager to share his good fortune, would inevitably pick up the tab. What started as occasional beers became elaborate dinner parties at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to ski resorts, and concerts where Marcus would surprise everyone with VIP tickets. His college friend Jake, who had struggled to find work after graduation, became a constant companion. "You're a lifesaver, Marcus," Jake would say after another expensive evening. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah, his former study partner who now worked at a non-profit for a fraction of Marcus's salary, would beam when he surprised her with designer handbags. "You're too generous," she would laugh, but her eyes would light up with each gift. The attention felt incredible. Marcus had spent most of his life invisible, the quiet kid in class, the one who ate lunch alone, the guy girls looked past at parties. Now people sought him out. His phone buzzed with invitations, his calendar filled with social events, and, for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly valued by his peers. At TechFlow, Marcus threw himself into his work with passionate intensity. He stayed late into the night debugging code, volunteered for the most challenging projects, and quickly earned the respect of his colleagues and supervisor, Linda Morrison. His innovative solutions saved the company thousands of dollars, and his dedication seemed to promise a bright future. But the tech industry is notoriously volatile, and TechFlow was no exception. The company had grown too fast, spending venture capital money like water while struggling to find a sustainable revenue model. By Marcus's second year, the warning signs were everywhere: frozen hiring, canceled projects, hushed conversations between executives. Marcus noticed but convinced himself his value to the company made him indispensable. The layoffs came on a Tuesday morning in October. Linda called Marcus into her office with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, sliding a severance package across her desk. "The board demanded we cut 40% of our workforce. I fought to keep you, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. Marcus's position, along with most of the development team, had been eliminated. The severance package was generous, 3 months of salary, but Marcus had grown accustomed to his new lifestyle. His monthly expenses had ballooned to match his income. The downtown loft cost $3,200 per month, his car payment was $650, and his credit cards carried balances from all those nights of generous spending. He had saved almost nothing. At first, Marcus's friends rallied around him. "Don't worry, man," Jake assured him over lunch. "Someone with your skills will land on their feet in no time." Sarah organized a job-hunting support group that met weekly at coffee shops. The entire friend group seemed confident that Marcus's unemployment would be temporary. Marcus threw himself into job searching with the same intensity he had brought to his work. He updated his resume, reached out to contacts, and applied to dozens of positions. But the market had shifted. The startup boom that had created his original opportunity had cooled considerably. Companies were being more selective, and many were hiring only senior developers with years of experience. Marcus's single year at TechFlow, while impressive, wasn't enough to make him stand out in the crowded field. Weeks turned into months. Marcus's severance ran out, and he was forced to take on freelance graphic design work, a skill he had developed in college but hadn't used professionally. The pay was inconsistent and much lower than his previous salary. He found himself working twice as hard for a quarter of the income. The first crack in his social foundation appeared at Jake's birthday party. Marcus had always been the one to organize such events, booking private dining rooms and covering the costs for friends who couldn't afford them. This time, Jake's girlfriend had planned a house party with a bring-your-own-bottle policy. Marcus arrived with a six-pack of cheap beer, all he could afford, and immediately felt the shift in energy. "Oh, Marcus brought the budget option," someone joked, and, while others laughed it off, Marcus noticed the subtle change in how people interacted with him. Conversations felt shorter, less engaged. People seemed to be looking past him, waiting for someone more interesting to join the circle. Sarah's birthday a month later was the real turning point. She had mentioned wanting to try a new upscale restaurant downtown, and, in the past, Marcus would have jumped at the chance to make reservations and treat everyone. Instead, he suggested a more affordable option. "Actually, I was thinking we could do something low-key," he said, hating how the words felt in his mouth. "Oh," Sarah said, her smile faltering for just a moment. "Sure, that works too." But Marcus could see the disappointment in her eyes, and, worse, he could see her calculating, reassessing his value to the group. The restaurant they chose was perfectly nice, but Marcus found himself checking the menu prices twice before ordering. When the bill came, the old Marcus would have grabbed it without thinking. Instead, he waited as others reached for their wallets, contributing only his share. The gesture felt foreign and uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. After dinner, the group had planned to go to a trendy rooftop bar, but Marcus begged off. "I should head home," he said, knowing he couldn't afford the $15 cocktails. He could see the relief in some faces, relief that they wouldn't have to worry about including someone who couldn't keep up with their lifestyle. Walking home alone, Marcus felt a crushing realization settling in his chest. The friendships he had treasured, the social life he had built, the sense of belonging he had finally found, all of it had been built on a foundation of money. Not his personality, not his intelligence, not his loyalty or humor or any of the qualities he thought mattered. Just his ability to pay for things. The invitations started coming less frequently. Group chats continued without him, and Marcus would only discover social gatherings had happened when he saw photos on social media the next day. Jake stopped responding to texts as quickly. Sarah seemed busy whenever Marcus suggested getting together. Marcus tried to maintain the relationships by offering what he could. He cooked dinner for friends at his apartment, suggested free activities like hiking or visiting museums on discount days. But he could feel the energy shift. People seemed distracted during these gatherings, checking their phones more often, leaving earlier than they used to. The hardest part wasn't the rejection, it was the growing realization of how naive he had been. Marcus had thought these people cared about him, had valued his friendship, had enjoyed his company for who he was. Looking back, he could see the truth with painful clarity. Every invitation, every laugh, every moment of connection had been transactional. He had been purchasing their attention without realizing it. His financial situation continued to deteriorate. The freelance work was inconsistent, and Marcus found himself falling behind on bills for the first time in his adult life. He moved from his downtown loft to a smaller apartment, then to an even smaller studio. He sold the BMW and took public transportation. Each downsizing felt like shedding another layer of the identity he had built, revealing the person he had always been underneath, someone struggling to get by, someone easily overlooked. The eviction notice in his hand represented more than just a housing crisis. It was the final collapse of the illusion he had built around himself. Marcus had learned the hardest lesson of his young adult life: when your usefulness disappears, so does everyone else's interest in you. He was about to discover just how right Machiavelli had been about human nature, and how much more there was to learn about who he really was beneath the veneer of financial success. The homeless shelter smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Marcus sat on the edge of a thin cot, holding a plastic bag containing everything he owned. 2 weeks had passed since his eviction, and the reality of his situation had finally sunk in completely. The friends who had once filled his calendar with social activities hadn't returned his calls in months. The silence was deafening. During his first week on the streets, Marcus had swallowed his pride and reached out to Jake one final time. "I'm going through a really rough patch," he had texted. "Could I crash on your couch for a few days?" The response came 6 hours later. "Sorry man, my roommate situation is complicated right now. Hope things work out." The message felt like a door slamming shut on his old life. At the shelter, Marcus met people whose stories echoed his own in unexpected ways. There was David, a former corporate lawyer who had lost everything to gambling addiction. Maria, an engineer who had been laid off during the 2008 recession and never fully recovered. These weren't the stereotypical homeless people he had imagined. They were educated, articulate individuals who had simply run out of safety nets. "The middle class is just 3 paychecks away from homelessness," David told him during their first conversation over dinner at the shelter's cafeteria. "Most people don't realize how thin the line really is." Marcus found comfort in these conversations, even as they forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the society he thought he understood. The shelter had rules and programs designed to help residents get back on their feet. Marcus signed up for job placement services and career counseling. He spent hours at the public library using their computers to search for work, his appearance carefully maintained despite his circumstances. He had learned to shower at the gym using a day pass, to keep his clothes clean at the laundromat, to present himself as someone temporarily down on his luck rather than chronically homeless. The irony wasn't lost on him that his best conversations in months were happening with people society had written off. Elena, a former teacher who had lost her job due to budget cuts, became his closest friend at the shelter. She had a sharp wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of literature that made their evening talks the highlight of his day. Unlike his former friends, Elena listened when he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own struggles without judgment. "You know what's funny?" Elena said one evening as they sat in the shelter's common area. "I spent years trying to teach kids about social justice and inequality, but I never really understood it until I ended up here. Now I see how quickly people become invisible when they can't contribute to the economy." Marcus knew exactly what she meant. Walking through his old neighborhood had become an exercise in ghostliness. Former colleagues would cross the street when they saw him coming, or suddenly become very interested in their phones. The few times he had been recognized, the conversations were painfully brief, filled with awkward platitudes about everything working out soon. After 6 weeks at the shelter, Marcus finally landed a job at a call center handling customer service for a telecommunications company. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was steady income. He rented a small room in a boarding house, a far cry from his former loft, but it was private space with a door that locked. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. The work was mind-numbing but manageable. 8 hours a day of answering complaints about phone bills and internet outages, dealing with frustrated customers who treated him like a punching bag. But Marcus approached it with gratitude, remembering the desperation of complete unemployment. His supervisor, Janet, was a kind woman in her 50s who noticed his dedication and began giving him additional training opportunities. Slowly, Marcus began rebuilding his life on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than easy money. He furnished his small room with items from thrift stores, learning to find satisfaction in simple improvements. A used bookshelf from a garage sale, curtains sewn from fabric remnants, a small television rescued from someone's curb, each addition felt like a victory. The strangest part of his recovery was discovering who he really was without financial influence. At the shelter, Marcus had started an informal tutoring program, helping other residents with job applications and computer skills. He found genuine satisfaction in these interactions, a fulfillment that his high-paying job had never provided. These people valued his knowledge and kindness, not his bank account. Elena had secured housing as well, landing a job at a non-profit literacy organization. They maintained their friendship, meeting weekly for coffee at a small diner near the shelter. Their conversations ranged from philosophy to practical matters, and Marcus realized he had never had friendships this authentic during his wealthy period. "Do you miss it?" Elena asked him one evening over cheap coffee. "The money, the lifestyle, all that?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I miss the security," he said finally. "I miss not worrying about rent or groceries. But I don't miss the person I was becoming. I was so focused on maintaining this image that I forgot to develop any real substance. As months passed, Marcus continued advancing at the call center. His combination of technical knowledge and genuine empathy made him excellent at solving customer problems. Janet promoted him to a senior customer service role, then to a training position. The salary increases were modest but meaningful, each one allowing him to rebuild his stability piece by piece. One evening, while updating his budget spreadsheet in his small room, Marcus realized something remarkable had happened. He was happy. Not the manic, shopping high happiness he had felt during his wealthy period, but a deeper contentment rooted in purpose and authentic relationships. He had learned to find joy in simple pleasures: a good book from the library, a home-cooked meal, a conversation with Elena about politics or poetry. The real test came when Marcus least expected it. Walking through downtown on his lunch break, he bumped into Sarah at a coffee shop. She looked exactly as he remembered, polished, put together, carrying designer accessories that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Marcus," she exclaimed, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they encounter someone they feel sorry for. "How are you? I heard you went through some tough times." Marcus smiled genuinely. "I'm doing well, actually. Working, living in my own place again. Learning a lot about myself." Sarah's expression showed a mixture of relief and curiosity. "That's wonderful. We should catch up sometime. Jake was just saying the other day that we missed having you around." The invitation hung in the air between them, and Marcus recognized it for what it was: an offer to return to his old role as the group's benefactor now that they believed he might have money again. He could see the calculation in Sarah's eyes, the assessment of his clothing and appearance, trying to determine his current financial status. "I'd like that," Marcus said carefully. "Though I should mention, I'm on a pretty tight budget these days. My idea of a good time is more along the lines of a picnic in the park or a free museum day." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, just as it had during his unemployment. "Oh, sure. That sounds nice. Let me check my calendar and get back to you." Marcus knew she wouldn't call, and he found that he didn't mind. The interaction had been a perfect test of how much he had changed and grown. A year ago, he would have been devastated by her reaction, desperate to prove his worth through expensive gestures he couldn't afford. Now he saw her response as information about her character, not his value as a person. Walking back to work, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. He had lost his wealth, his status, and his social circle, but he had gained something far more valuable: a clear understanding of who he was and what truly mattered. The shelter had stripped away his illusions about friendship and society, but it had also revealed his capacity for resilience and genuine connection. That evening, Marcus called Elena to share the encounter with Sarah. They laughed about the predictability of it, then moved on to discussing the book they were both reading, a biography of Frederick Douglass that Elena had recommended. As they talked, Marcus felt grateful for the strange path his life had taken. He had learned that when your need disappears, people's true nature emerges, both their selfishness and their capacity for authentic love. The key was learning to recognize the difference and choosing relationships accordingly. 5 years had passed since Marcus's eviction, and the transformation in his life was profound. He now managed the customer service department at the telecommunications company, overseeing a team of 25 representatives. His salary wasn't extravagant, but it was stable and sufficient for a comfortable middle-class life. More importantly, Marcus had learned to build his identity around character rather than wealth. The small apartment he had rented after leaving the boarding house had become a warm, welcoming space filled with books, plants, and artwork created by local artists he had befriended. Elena, now the director of the literacy nonprofit where she worked, remained his closest friend. They had built a circle of relationships based on shared interests and mutual support rather than financial transactions. Marcus had also discovered a passion for mentoring that grew from his experiences at the homeless shelter. Every Saturday morning, he volunteered at a job training program for people transitioning out of homelessness. He taught basic computer skills and helped with resume writing, but, more importantly, he listened to their stories and reminded them that their current circumstances didn't define their worth. The hardest part isn't learning the skills, he would tell the participants. It's remembering that you matter, that you have value beyond what you can produce or provide for others. These words, born from his own painful experience, resonated deeply with people who felt forgotten by society. One Saturday morning, Marcus was surprised to see a familiar face among the new participants, Jake, his former college friend who had disappeared during Marcus's darkest period. Jake looked older, worn down by circumstances that Marcus could only guess at. Their eyes met across the room, and Marcus saw a flash of recognition followed by embarrassment. During the break, Jake approached hesitantly. "Marcus? I didn't expect to see you here." "I volunteer here every week," Marcus said simply, his voice neither warm nor cold. "What brings you to the program?" Jake's story tumbled out in a rush of shame and desperation. He had been laid off from his marketing job 8 months earlier. His unemployment benefits had run out, and he had burned through his savings trying to maintain his lifestyle. Like Marcus years before, Jake had discovered how quickly social connections evaporated when you could no longer participate in expensive activities. "I lost my apartment last month," Jake admitted, staring at his hands. "I've been staying with different people, but you know how that goes. Everyone's patience runs out eventually." Marcus did know. He remembered the isolation, the shame, the growing realization that relationships built on convenience rarely survive inconvenience. Looking at Jake, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: old hurt, current sympathy, and something approaching forgiveness. "The program is really helpful," Marcus said. "Janet, who runs it, has connections with employers who understand that good people sometimes face tough circumstances. If you're willing to work hard and be honest about your situation, there are opportunities." Over the following weeks, Marcus watched Jake navigate the same humbling journey he had traveled 5 years earlier. Jake struggled with the job training, not because the material was difficult, but because accepting help required admitting how drastically his life had changed. Marcus recognized the signs: the defensive posture, the excuses, the lingering belief that this was all temporary and he would soon return to his previous status. During one particularly difficult session, Jake broke down while practicing interview skills. "I don't know how to explain the gap in my resume," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to tell people that I've been homeless for 2 months. How do you come back from something like this?" Marcus remembered asking Elena the same question years earlier. She had told him that recovery wasn't about returning to who you were before, it was about becoming someone better. Now he shared that wisdom with Jake. "You don't come back," Marcus said gently. "You move forward. And, sometimes, if you're lucky, you discover that the person you become is stronger and more authentic than the person you lost." Jake looked at him with confusion and something that might have been hope. "How are you so calm about all this? Aren't you angry about what happened to you? Don't you want revenge on the people who abandoned you?" Marcus had wrestled with those feelings for years. The anger had been consuming at first, then, gradually transformed into understanding. "I was angry," he admitted. "But anger was just another prison. When I let it go, I found something better: clarity about who I really am and what kind of relationships I want in my life." As Jake progressed through the program, Marcus began to see glimpses of the person his old friend could become. Stripped of his previous arrogance and entitlement, Jake showed flashes of humor and vulnerability that had been buried beneath his former persona. He began helping other participants with their job searches, sharing contacts from his previous career and offering encouragement. The breakthrough came when Jake landed a position as a customer service representative at a small insurance company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady income with opportunities for advancement. More importantly, Jake approached the job with gratitude rather than resentment. "I never thanked the people who helped me before," Jake told Marcus after his first week. "I just expected it. I thought I deserved it because of who I was or what I had accomplished. I never realized how much effort and kindness goes into supporting someone." Marcus understood the revelation. During his wealthy period, he had been generous with money but careless with appreciation. He had treated service workers as invisible, had taken favors for granted, had assumed that his success made him inherently more valuable than others. Homelessness had stripped away those illusions and taught him to recognize the dignity and worth in every person he encountered. The most unexpected development came 6 months later, when Sarah contacted Marcus through social media. Her message was different from their previous encounter, longer, more thoughtful, seemingly genuine. "I heard you've been helping people at the job center," she wrote. "I wanted to apologize for how I behaved when you were struggling. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I realize I failed you as a friend. I was selfish and shallow, and I'm sorry." Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. Sarah's apology felt sincere, but he also recognized that she was reaching out during a period when his reputation for helping others had grown. Local newspapers had featured stories about the job training program, mentioning Marcus's work. He wondered if her newfound interest was motivated by genuine remorse or by his rising profile in the community. After discussing it with Elena, Marcus decided to meet Sarah for coffee. She looked nervous when she arrived, fidgeting with her purse and avoiding eye contact. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of genuine reflection. "I'd been in therapy," she said without preamble. "Working through some things about myself and my relationships. I realized that I've spent my whole life using people for what they could provide rather than valuing them for who they are. When you lost your job, I didn't see it as an opportunity to support a friend, I saw it as you becoming less useful to me." Her honesty was disarming. Marcus had expected excuses or justifications, not this level of self-awareness. "What changed?" he asked. Sarah smiled sadly. "I got sick last year. Cancer. Nothing life-threatening, but it required surgery and months of treatment. I had to take leave from work, couldn't afford my usual activities, looked terrible from the chemotherapy. Suddenly, I understood what it felt like to need help instead of providing entertainment." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Most of my friends disappeared, just like I disappeared on you. The people who stayed weren't the ones I expected. My doorman, Miguel, checked on me every day. My neighbor, an elderly woman I had barely spoken to, brought me meals. A coworker I had always considered boring drove me to appointments when I was too weak to drive myself." Marcus felt a familiar ache of recognition. Crisis had a way of revealing people's true character, both their selfishness and their capacity for love. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said, and meant it. "But I'm glad you learned from it." They talked for 2 hours, and Marcus found himself appreciating the person Sarah was becoming. She had started volunteering at a cancer support center, had simplified her lifestyle to focus on meaningful relationships, and was working to make amends to people she had treated poorly. Like Jake, she seemed to be discovering who she really was beneath the surface persona she had maintained. As Marcus walked home that evening, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. The title of Machiavelli's observation, "When your need disappears, their eyes turn toward you," had proven true in ways the philosopher probably never intended. When Marcus's financial usefulness had disappeared, most people had turned away. But when he had stopped needing their validation, when he had built a life based on authentic purpose rather than material success, different kinds of people had turned toward him, people seeking genuine connection, mentorship, and friendship. The homeless shelter had been his university, teaching him lessons about human nature that no business school could provide. He had learned that security comes not from accumulating wealth, but from developing skills, relationships, and self-knowledge that can't be taken away. He had discovered that respect earned through character lasts longer than attention bought with money. Most importantly, Marcus had learned to distinguish between transactions and relationships, between networking and friendship, between being valued and being used. The people in his life now, Elena, his mentorship program participants, his colleagues who had supported him through difficult times, chose to be there because of who he was, not what he could provide. Standing in his modest apartment, surrounded by the life he had built from nothing, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction that his former wealth had never provided. He had learned Machiavelli's lesson the hard way, but, in losing everything, he had found something far more valuable: himself. The eyes that turned toward him now belonged to people who saw his true worth, and that made all the difference.